Hello everyone, and welcome to this virtual presentation for the Tyler Area MPO. We're excited to share the plan for upcoming transportation projects in our region, which we're going to cover later in the presentation. But first, we'd like to share some information about us for anyone who is not familiar with the MPO. A Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO for short, is a local decision-making body responsible for overseeing the transportation planning process. The MPO's role is to gather input from the community regarding the needs of the transportation system. The MPO then develops a prioritized list of projects in keeping with that input. Any transportation project that will use federal dollars to fund the project must first be listed in the MPO's plans before the agency constructing the project may receive the funds. There are over 400 MPOs in the country, and we are one of 23 MPOs in the state of Texas. The Tyler urbanized area was designated an MPO in 1974. The MPO boundary originally covered the city of Tyler, but as the region grew, additional cities became part of Tyler's greater urbanized area. The current MPO boundary was established after the 2010 census and includes urbanized areas and areas expected to become urbanized over the next 20 years. The boundary will be reviewed again after the findings of the 2020 census are published. The MPO is led by representatives from the various governmental stakeholders in the region who are responsible for constructing, maintaining, and improving transportation. The role of the MPO's Transportation Policy Committee is to maintain long and short-range plans that prioritize how our limited federal transportation dollars will be spent to best meet our increasing needs. The MPO staff is charged with gathering public input for the Policy Committee members to consider in their ranking process. It is important to note that the MPO's authority is limited to planning and prioritization of federal funds. It does not include project design or construction. The projects listed in the MPO's plans will be constructed by the Texas Department of Transportation, who will have separate open houses to gather input on proposed designs of facilities. Anyone with comments or questions about the design or construction of the projects listed in these plans should contact the TxDOT District Office located at 2709 West Front Street in Tyler. This brings us to how transportation projects are funded. The primary revenue source of transportation dollars is generated from federal and state taxes. The MPO's long and short-range plans must be fiscally constrained, meaning that the plans can only list construction projects that can reasonably be expected to be financed with the revenue that the MPO is estimated to receive. Because transportation funding is dependent on taxes, the state of the economy has a major impact on the revenue forecast. As revenue forecasts change, the MPO must amend its plans to adjust for the revised funding projections. First, let's discuss the MPO's long-range plan called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. You'll hear me call it the MTP for short. The MTP is the document that sets the priorities for constructing transportation projects using the limited federal funding that we expect to receive over the next 25 years. Any project within the MPO boundary that will use federal dollars to fund any portion of the construction must be listed in the MTP before the funds can be allocated to the project. This leads to the short-range plan called the Transportation Improvement Program. You'll hear me refer to it as the TIP throughout the remainder of the presentation. The TIP provides details on the costs associated with implementing various highway and transit projects that are slated to begin construction in the next 4 years. It also lists projects which are currently under development that are not proposed for construction yet. The projects requested to be amended are located along Old Jacksonville Highway. The corridor was studied in 2015 by an engineering firm called BGE, who held 3 public meetings to understand the needs of residents and business owners with property on Old Jacksonville. While considering the public input and applying best engineering practices, BGE made recommendations on how to improve traffic flow on Old Jacksonville as the traffic continues to grow. This study led to the recommendation that Old Jacksonville be widened to 6 lanes from Loop 323 in Tyler south to FM 2813 in Gresham. In addition to the widening project, BGE modeled efficiency at the intersections along Old Jacksonville before and after the widening. The table on the left gives a grade to the level of service of each intersection. Think of it as a letter grade for how efficiently the intersections move traffic without causing excessive delays. The table on the right forecasts the level of service assuming the widening improvements were installed. While most intersections show a marked increase in their performance, the intersection at Loop 323 continues to operate at a failing grade if no improvements are made other than widening the road. This means that users could continue to expect to have a wait time going through multiple iterations through the traffic signal cycle before being able to move through the intersection. This led to a second project, which is to implement intersection improvements at Old Jacksonville and Loop 323. Taking its cue from the MPO, TxDOT began developing a concept to study the impacts of an overpass at the intersection of Old Jacksonville Highway and Loop 323. This proposal was met with concern from the adjacent business owners. So the MPO chose to revise the project description in the MPO's plans from saying, construct an interchange, to instead say, construct intersection improvements. This was done to acknowledge that an overpass was one option to improve efficiency, but should also not be the only potential solution studied. Since amending the plans, the MPO has continued to receive comments about the widening and possibility of constructing an overpass. The majority of the comments that have been received from the drivers along the corridor support the potential to construct an overpass. Conversely, the MPO has also received letters from business coalitions and other representatives who are in opposition to the potential overpass construction. The primary concern involves the economic impacts on the surrounding businesses during the time it will take to complete the project construction. In response to the feedback, the MPO has drafted 2 amendments to the Old Jacksonville projects. The first proposed amendment relates to the project to widen Old Jacksonville to 6 lanes from Loop 323 south to FM 2813. The amendment would add language making note of the items that are expected to be addressed during the design and construction phases of development. Specifically, the language speaks to assuring safe ingress and egress by property owners by means such as installing traffic signals at the intersections of Old Jacksonville Highway and Capitol Drive. This is to accommodate semi-tractor-trailer truck movement into and out of the warehouse. The second proposed amendment relates to the project to construct intersection improvements at Old Jacksonville Highway and Loop 323 in response to the 6-lane widening project. Based on the negative response received, the proposed language specifically notes that an overpass may not be considered as a potential solution. This presentation kicks off a 30-day public comment period where the public is invited to consider the proposed amendments and share their input with the MPO staff. This input will be shared with the MPO's Transportation Policy Committee when they next meet on June 17th to consider and vote on whether to approve or deny the requested amendments. This concludes the presentation on the proposed plan updates. Should anyone want to ask a question or share a comment about the projects, they can contact the MPO staff through the Contact Us page under the About Us section on the MPO website. You can also email the staff at mpo@tylertexas.com or send a written letter to 423 West Ferguson Street, Tyler, Texas 75702. Thank you everyone for taking the time to view this virtual presentation.